relentless. And so I hope that just this little colloquy today will help alert more of our colleagues about the importance of us working together to address this. And I look forward to being part of that process. Nothing happens very quickly around this place. Sometimes you have to work on things for years to get them done. But speaking of working hard to solve problems, my hope is that we are closing in on our ability to pass the next COVID-19 relief bill. As the presiding officer knows, we've been at this for a while. It's been since March that we passed the CARES Act, and we've tried a number of times to try to pass additional relief to our small businesses and individuals, provide more resources to our frontline healthcare workers, make sure they had the PPE, the testing, and that the vaccine that is now here can be deployed in a way that as many Americans who can get the vaccine as possible will do so. But again, we know that the intervening election has been a problem because some people saw benefits to not solving the problem, and that would somehow gain them advantage at the ballot box. And still, today, there are still disagreements over a handful of controversial provisions. But as we enter the final days of the 116th Congress, it's now time to break that stalemate. There's no doubt in my mind that every member of this body has a little different vision about what the next relief package should look like. But as the old saying goes, we shouldn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. The search for compromise, which is really part of our job description here, on some of the most controversial measures has left us empty-handed. And it's time to set aside those pieces that we can't agree on and make progress on the ones we can. First and foremost is funding for vaccine distribution that I alluded to a moment ago. Last week, the FDA approved the first COVID-19 vaccine, and the process of vaccinating our frontline healthcare workers is already underway. And there's a good chance by this time next week, millions of doses of a second approved vaccine will be en route to hospitals across the country. There's no question that the race to develop an effective COVID vaccine has been a success. It's really been nothing short of a miracle. Now it's critical we take additional actions to ensure the race to distribute the vaccine is successful as well. We've been waiting and planning for a vaccine all year, but funding Congress provided in the CARES Act to help execute the nationwide distribution project has run dry. While the cost of the vaccine itself is already covered, there are a host of other expenses that come with vaccinating tens of millions, maybe hundreds of millions of people. States are dipping into their other sources of funding to ensure they have the capabilities to carry out this widespread effort, but it takes specialized equipment from ultra-low temperature freezers to store the vaccine, to masks and gloves and other PPE to protect those administering it, and it's easy to see that the costs add up quickly. So the time for politicking and campaigning is over. Now is the time for us to solve this problem and ensure that this vaccine distribution program goes off without a hitch. This is the silver bullet we've been praying for and hoping for, and it would be shameful if our partisan dysfunction in Congress stood in the way of the success of Operation Warp Speed. Second, we must support the men and women whose livelihoods have been upended by this pandemic. We all know that. We've done a lot, but we need to do more. We didn't know in March how long this virus would last, how many lockdowns would ensue. In April, as businesses closed doors to stop the spread from the virus, our nationwide unemployment rate skyrocketed to 14.7%. Tens of millions of Americans simply had no way to earn a paycheck, cover their bills, or even put food on their table. Many relied on the bolstered unemployment insurance benefits provided through the CARES Act, which helped cover bills and expenses until they were able to resume their jobs. Fortunately, our economic engine did not remain stalled for long. That's not only due to what we've done here, but what the Federal Reserve has done. And over the past several months, the unemployment rate has gradually ticked down and reached 6.7% in November. I have no doubt that we'll continue to rebuild our economy and put more people back to work who are eager to get back to work. But the reality is it's going to take a while. There's still workers with no way to earn a paycheck, and unless we take action, they're sure to face an even more dire economic strain in the days ahead. The day after Christmas, 2 key programs from the CARES Act expire, which will leave millions of Americans without the jobless benefits that they and their families need to survive. That would be a shame, it would be embarrassing, and frankly, just be flat negligent on our part if we did not intervene to make sure that we established a continuum of support for these folks who, through no fault of their own, find themselves without work. These are the same people who, again, through no fault of their own, had the rug pulled out from under them earlier this year, and we can't leave them hanging. We have to help. But we know the process is happening much faster for some businesses than others. Many businesses, it's interesting, a number of businesses, I would say, are flourishing during the pandemic. It's really, really interesting, while others are just flat on their back or non-existent. Many small businesses that have already received PPP loans are still operating at a significant loss. They're unable to bring in enough revenue to keep their businesses and employees above water, and they need more assistance. And again, that's because of a lack of demand or because of restrictions governments have been placed on people in the interest of public health. Some of them seemingly pretty arbitrary. I won't go down that path here, but these folks need help. Currently, those businesses aren't eligible for a second draw of the PPP, and unless we want main streets across the country to turn into ghost towns, that needs to change. We need to reopen the PPP with additional funding for the hardest hit businesses to receive a second loan. This is the most effective way of keeping Americans connected with their employer and more small businesses on track for a strong post-pandemic recovery. And there are a number of other businesses, small businesses, that didn't qualify for the PPP, which need our assistance too. Things like small independent music venues are the best example of a critical Main Street industry that's dying under the current COVID restrictions. That's why I worked with our friend from Minnesota, Senator Klobuchar, to introduce the Save Our Stages Act, which will keep independent venues across America from closing their doors for good. This wouldn't just apply to live music venues in Austin, Texas. This would apply to symphonies, to potentially Broadway. This would apply across the board. And I'm proud to say that 56 of our colleagues have co-sponsored Save Our Stages, making it one of the most widely supported stimulus proposals before the Senate. So again, the presiding officer I know has had his shoulder to the grindstone on this topic for a long time now, and we still have a lot of work to do, but we don't have much time. Beyond these 3 goals, there's a lot more I'd like to see in the relief bill, and I guarantee all 535 members of Congress would like to see more or other things in a relief bill. But the fact of the matter is we've been unable to reach an agreement on a bill that includes the most controversial priorities, and it's time to take action where we can act, where we do have consensus, and come back next year and try to do more and try to do better. Each of these areas I mentioned, support for vaccines, our workers, the small businesses, have that sort of strong bipartisan support. So I think all 100 of us, whether we're Republicans or independents or Democrats, should be able to line up behind a bill that supports these goals. Over the last several days, we've seen more bipartisan communication and cooperation than we saw in the months leading up to this point, certainly since March. And I hope we're able to reach an agreement and pass another relief bill before gaveling out. Matter of fact, I heard the majority leader say we're not leaving until we do, and I agree with that. The American people have repeatedly called on Congress to provide support for those hit hardest by this pandemic, and we simply cannot and will not let them down. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.